Hi everyone, I'm Khan, you are watching The Wrath of Minis, and today I'm going to be breaking down the painting of the Labrynthauros, the Aeon Trespass model. Partly as I've been playing this game, I've been painting these models, I'm trying to get my cycle 1 entirely finished, which I've just kind of about done, and I thought I'd show you guys what my thought processes were with my painting and, you know, the final execution of the model itself. If you guys have been enjoying these videos up to this point, obviously like, subscribe, and if you guys are interested in supporting the channel, we have a Patreon which you guys can go and check out. One of the things that I wanted to do while I've been doing these painting videos is I don't want to give you guys a recipe specifically about how to paint. Like, oh, I use this color, that color, some other things. I kind of want to talk to you guys a bit about how to sort of approach it. And what I mean by this is, obviously, everyone comes at painting in a different way. We come from different places, we have different perspectives, and that's what's great about, you know, art and all that general things. But if I give you a recipe, you go, oh, okay, I'm gonna do this, and you try to copy it exactly, and you will be maybe upset or you won't be happy with it because it doesn't end up looking exactly like someone else's work, whatever it happens to be. And if you learn to see, or you learn to contemplate or think about how you would paint, then that will give you a better understanding or route about how you would go about painting, if that makes any sense. Does that make any sense? I hope that makes some sense. So I just want to talk through you guys about how I came to this, and, you know, hopefully that is helpful in some way. So, like anything, when you've got a brand new model, you need to give it a little prep, a little clean, just make sure everything's there. If there are mold lines that you don't want, remove them. If you don't care, keep them. That's cool. Then you prime your model, and then you are going to, I will then Zenithal. Now, Zenithal to me is a very important piece of work. Depending on how you paint, Zenithal does a couple of things. Firstly, it shows you where your light's going to be sitting on the model, where your focus points are, where you want your shadows to be. And you can do all of that when you're doing your Zenithal. You can think about, oh, I'm gonna have more light here, I'm gonna have shadows here. So Zenithal is a really important part. It also means that the saturation of your colors, once you put it on top of white, it's gonna be more powerful. So if you want more pop, brighter colors, then a white's a really nice thing to have. It also means that if you're utilizing thinner paint, then you will get to be able to see the gradients much more clearly because you have your Zenithal there. So for me, that's a really nice thing to have. And it's a great foundation to work from. Then it's time to apply your next coat. So because I've already got my airbrush out, there's no real reason for me to go and get my brush out and do it. It just will take longer. I can just swap the paint out on my airbrush. So what I do with my airbrush at this point is I look at the model, I'm thinking, okay, I've got my dark tones where I know, and I want my bright tones. So what I'll do is I'll start with perhaps my dark tones. And so that'll be a dark brown, might be an earthy brown, whatever, you know, dark color you think that would be a kind of a gold or copper color that you think of. You take that and then you spray it into all the shadowed areas, you know, just avoiding the place where you think that you want your main focus point to be. So the main focus point on this model is going to be his head, but his hump on his, you know, his hump, yeah, his head. This hump. And that bit's the bit that I'm like, I want that to be the main focus point. With that in mind, I'll switch paints and go to a brighter kind of yellowy gold color. Could be like a yellow ochre or something of that nature. Take that into my airbrush and spray directly to that main hump section where I'm looking for the gold armor. So once you've gotten all of the armor kind of painted in that sort of brownish, goldish color, I realized that I wanted more pop from it than I had originally started with. I was like, oh, okay, I could do with a bit more more contrast to these things. Let me turn it up. So a way of doing that is to go back a little bit by actually adding brightness. But the way I would do that is then to use my white again and go directly on top of where those points that I want to be brighter. So as you can see, I spray white back over those sort of key main focal areas, and then I'm taking an even brighter yellow, and I'm going to then spray that directly to those spots. And so that I'm really punching the contrast a bit. So it's nice, it's like even if you make the mistake, or even though you're like, oh, it's not quite going how I want it to, because it's so early at this moment of time, it's so easy to kind of fix those things. And one of the things about just painting or practically anything is learning to fix one's mistakes, or to try and direct it in a way that, in the direction that you want it to be. With the armor getting to the point where I'm like, that's okay, cool, good. General colors are down. It's time to kind of like fill out the rest of it. This model is a strange looking model. Maybe you can tell. It's like some Eldritch Doom Ball or something like that. That's got like, it's like part like robot mechanicum plus, I don't know, squid. It's a strange thing, whatever it was. And so even when you look at it, and you look at the art, I'm like, I can't quite tell what is what. And so sometimes when that's the case, it's really worthwhile base coating everything. You know, finding out all the pieces of what this model actually is, so you can see like, this is this thing, I'll paint it this way, I'll paint it that way. And so at this point, I'm going to base coat it, all the rest of the stuff. So one of the things is what I kind of talk about in another video is wet blending. When I think about like tentacle arms and things like that, I always think of like multicolored stuff. Maybe it's just because of octopuses, or I don't even know. That's my suspicion, it's my feeling about it. And I'm like, I'm going to do that to this model. So for that, I've decided that I'm going to take like a purple magenta and move into sort of like a aquamarine blue. It's kind of I feel like it's a kind of a classic kind of lead up in color combination changes. And I'm like, I'll just do that. So a bit of wet blending, very straightforward thing. Just grab some paint. You don't really need much water at all, really. You know, start with some dark colors in one area, get some other colors out, and then kind of combine them together. And you just need to play around with it. And if you find that you can't work well with wet blending, a little retarder can help you, you know, spend more time doing it. But it gives you like a really nice seamless blend, and that's like the lovely thing about wet blending. So as you can see, I'm just going through the rest of the model, picking out the little details, making sure that things are differentiated from each other. I painted like the green tuff that's like on top of his like major, on his hump or his shoulders. I picked out like the flags that are on his side. Everything is, I can see everything, I can tell what everything is. And so at this point in time, I'm like, well, I can work on the non-metallic metal, or I can work on the skin. And because the skin is more inside, so what I mean by this is that the plates of armor sit on the outside, and so the skin is a little bit inside that area, which means that it's probably the place to work on now, because I'm more likely to touch the armor with my paintbrush. So kind of like an inside out method. I'm working in the hardest areas to reach first and moving my way out. So I started working on the skin. The skin, I must say, when I was doing this, I had an idea, but I didn't quite know what I was doing. And I feel like that's a lot of the time with painting. It's just like you're kind of exploring something. And so I started doing it, you'll see that I painted, and I actually change it like part of the way through. I'm like, I don't like the colors, I don't like how my combinations are working. And I'll eventually kind of go back over it and completely change the color scope a little bit. One thing about the skin, I wanted there to feel fluid. I wanted there to be bright points, I wanted there to be dark areas, I wanted those contrasts to exist. So I knew that I was going to stay mostly in this kind of bluish, purple, magenta territory, and I needed to keep it there, but I wanted it to pop. And so you need to add a little bit of white or some other little like various nuances to it. And because it's like a squid-like thing, I was like, little dots everywhere, you know, to try and make it look like just a bit more like real life, sort of. Yeah, so it's one of the really cool things about glazing is that you can, things you don't like, you can kind of cover up, you can switch, you can kind of like make it like go into the background. It'll still give you like information, like your eyes will still see something and be like, oh, that's different or interesting, but and then you can still build up on top of it. So glazing is a great way of like covering up stuff, but still keeping like some nuances there. Eventually, when I got to a point where I'm like, okay, I got a sense for it. I don't quite like where the skin's at. I'm gonna go and work on some other part of it. So I decided to work on the non-metallic metal part. So non-metallic metal, I don't know if I got any like real tips or tricks to this one. The only thing I can really say is you need to keep control of your midtones and your gradients. So as you build up your gradients, or as you build up your highlights, you need to get to a point where you're dealing with like near whites. Whites gives it the sense of brightness and shine and the glint, And you need all the other mid-tone colors to stay there to give it the sense that there's light placement and it's changing a little bit. If you go too bright or too white in areas, it becomes desaturated and looks peculiar. And if you don't get your blends right, it just looks a little off-putting. You're just like, oh, look, you know, you can see it and it just doesn't look great. With something this big, in terms of like how much like metal plate there is, I didn't want to go like completely overboard. I didn't want to go insane with it because it's a game piece. I want to enjoy it. I don't want to be at it like looking at it on a competition level piece. I'm really just going around with sort of yellows and going to like ice yellow, like a off-white color, and eventually to white. And I'm just going around it, picking up all the little details and trying to remain and keep that gradient there. I will say that even if you go too bright, one of the nice things about sometimes going too bright or going too much in like the white territory is it's really easy to bring back a lot of pop, a lot of color if you're working in a slightly brighter color set. Because like a Zenithal, like we start with black and then we add Zenithal to make a white, and then whatever color we add on top of that white becomes really strong. It's very saturated depending on the colors we're utilizing, but it gives more the most pop there. And so even if we do that on a non-metallic metal, we have a means of like bringing it back. If we glaze appropriately, if we use our airbrush for that, you know, we can bring back colors and add darkness to things. So a common thing you'll see in like a lot of professional painters is kind of like a sketch and glaze kind of thing. They sketch out their general, their volumes, they sketch out where their lights are gonna be, and then they glaze effectively all the colors, the nuances, the shadows and things of that nature, and blend everything together in this sort of nice harmonious way. Obviously they're pros, right? So, bastards. So as you can see, I realize that I don't like the color of what I was doing with his like the squid-like thing, especially at his backside. So he's got like the squid tentacles and he's got like this shell-like thing, maybe he's come out of it. And originally it was like a reddish color, and it was the same sort of reddish color that the back end of the tentacles are, so the tips are kind of like this sort of turquoise. And I was like, these two can't be the same color because it gets like lost into each other. It's like, oh, a purple color and another purple color, and you know, the interesting part's the tail or the very end of the tail. And so to make it interesting again was to have those kind of contrasting colors next to each other. So I turned it blue effectively at the back end of it. And then I started doing dots again to kind of bring it back to life. Whenever I get to a point where I'm like, model is looking pretty sharp, or you know, something that I'm liking, I tend to go to the base at that point in time. And when it comes to bases, I'm a bit lax, truly, but I end up just taking paint from my wet palette. I almost never get new paint out, and I tend to just mix things around, so I'm keeping it kind of like relatively consistent because it feels like the same setting because I'm using the same colors. Obviously I'm going for like earthy, grayish tones. And so yeah, I just pick out the base, try and pick out all the details, highlight the edges and things like that, and try to call it quits. I don't want to go too hard with it, but I want to make it feel, like the real thing. A lot of the time with bases and stuff is that when I pick things out, it looks a bit, not only does it not look cohesive, there's like lots of brush marks or various things that make it not feel great or feel really good. So I find that it's very useful for glazing here is just to thin down your paints quite a lot. Not so thin that it's like going to take you forever, but just enough that you can apply it in certain areas. And as you put it in different spaces, you blend the unsightliness of certain, like your brush strokes or things where they're like abutting to each other, but they're not quite connected. The glazing part really smoothens all of that stuff down and, brings it to like a cohesive look. And yeah, that's it for the Labrynthauros. I think it looks pretty good, and I'm pretty happy with it. And it's been fun playing with this model when it's fully painted against, he's a kind of a bastard to fight, but these kind of games are, I suppose, and that's the point of it, and that's cool with me. I've been painting more of the Aeon Trespass stuff, and I've been really enjoying it. And I've been trying to find this sort of like nice, healthy balance of painting to a level that I like painting to without going completely crazy in the process, which is likely to happen more and more as I get older. Damn. Until next time.